I'm Travis Frame, and this is Frame by Frame. And today I'm going to be doing the 5th episode of my analysis series. In this series, and this episode, I'm going to be talking about the alternate viewpoints that are expressed within the films and how those kind of play off of the main characters. There are not really any specific plot points I'm going to be talking about spoiler-wise, but I will be talking about character interactions. So if you consider that to be a spoiler or something that you don't want to hear, I am warning you about that. But there won't be as many specific plot details or elements that were talked about like in the last episode. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the various reactions that are expressed to depression within each of the 3 films. One of the reasons I find these movies to be so impactful is that they not only show and portray a portrait of a character with depression, but they also portray an alternate perspective. And that's an important thing to show as well. I think oftentimes in society, people have a very harmful reaction to depression, and this can be really negative on the people who are being affected. In the films, there is the central character in each that for the most part is the focus of the aspects of the film dealing with depression. In Antichrist, it's she. In Melancholia, it's Justine. And in Nymphomaniac, it's Joe. However, there is also the character that is the primary reactor to these 3 characters' depression. In Antichrist, it is he. In Melancholia, it is Claire, Justine's sister. And in Nymphomaniac, it's Seligman. While most of these videos have focused on the first trio mentioned, this video will be more centered around this secondary trio and how they respond to the actions of the other 3. Understanding both sets of the 3 is integral in understanding the complete message that Von Trier is trying to communicate to the viewers. This video will also be slightly different from the next episode, as this will talk specifically about the protagonist's counterparts, whereas the next video will be more general and talk about the kind of societal reactions that are expressed. In Antichrist, either character can be seen as the protagonist, but it is really a story about she. However, the story is not complete without he. He provides the alternate reaction to the same incident, which is unique among the counterparts in the trilogy. Claire does not experience depression for the same reason that Justine does, nor does Seligman in the way that Joe does. This is one of the unique elements of Antichrist when compared to the trilogy as a whole. He reacts to the situation by essentially being non-reactive. He acts in a very plain and matter-of-fact way of speaking and acting, as opposed to the very apparent and open sadness that she feels. One of the reasons for this is to show that the same traumatic incident can affect individuals in different ways. The other reason for this is because he is a much different person than she. She even comments that they've been growing apart, likely because of their vastly different personalities. However, it is still clear that he is depressed. There is a general blandness and monotony and monotone nature to the entire performance, but not in a bad way, not by any means. It is meant to show a severe form of repression. He responds to she's feelings by pretending as if he doesn't feel the same way. There are a variety of reasons why this could be the case. Could it be because he is trying to play into the perceived sense of manliness in which he shouldn't show how he feels? Is it because he is trying to be strong for his wife and focus on her before himself? Could it be because he himself is in a state of shock or denial about the incident? It could be any of these or a variety of other reasons. The ambiguity of this is important because it allows the symbolic nature of the film to grow and show even more. The reason for the film, for him not responding, is ultimately that neither one truly helped the other with their feelings, and it resulted in both of them breaking down. In my opinion, it is not because of any mishandling of the situation, but more to show how destructive depression can be on one's psyche. He is meant to show that it is really hard to help another person going through depression when you ignore your own feelings. This is not Von Trier communicating the message that one should be selfish and only think about how they feel, but instead that people should not ignore their own feelings. It is okay for both of them to feel as they do, and while he did definitely understand how she felt and why she was feeling it, he might not have been the right person or the right state to help her all by himself. The potential main idea that Von Trier is trying to communicate with the couple is that solutions don't need to be taken on alone, and that both he and she should have gotten help from a third party, and that maybe that would have been something that would have been able to help. His bias as a psychiatrist likely could have clouded his judgment or affected the way in which he handled the situation. And while there are likely situations in which they would have been able to help each other out, and oftentimes that is something that is good, and they do try to help each other out, but they don't go about it in a way that is likely the healthiest option for the two of them. And that is in an integral way in how the relationship within the film uh, portrays and shows the ideas that are being expressed. Moving on to Melancholia, the sisters are much different. So different, in fact, that to accentuate this, Claire has an accent while Justine does not. Justine's response is very different from that of he in Antichrist because Claire is not experiencing the same emotions as Justine, at least not within the first half of the film. Justine is married and has a son and seems to be very organized, which is much different from the more spontaneous and random nature of many of Justine's actions. Justine is showing as responding very differently in the first part of the movie than she is in the second. In the first, she seems to look down on her sister for how she feels and criticizes her, saying she didn't want to make a scene. She is shown to be very frustrated with regards to Justine's depression, and while caring, is not really very understanding. In the second half of the film, it is quite different. Claire is just more understanding. She gets mad at her husband for criticizing Justine, saying she is unwell and recognizes that depression is not a choice. Claire is seen to understand more and is not as critical with regards to Justine, although she still does get frustrated with her. It is clear that this frustration is similar to how she felt earlier on, as she uses the same phrase. At the wedding, when frustrated, Claire says, "Sometimes I hate you so much." And in the second half, responds to Justine again, saying the exact same thing. "Sometimes I hate you so much, Justine." Claire is representative of many family members of those with depression. At first, they are not very understanding and easily frustrated, but despite the continuing frustration they may feel, they become more understanding and sympathetic once they are more aware of the true circumstances. This is a very direct character representation, however, it is a very deep one. This is why part one is titled Justine and part two is titled Claire. Family is an incredibly important part of someone's process and for someone who is battling depression. But it can be very damaging if a family member responds in a negative way. Justine is shown both reacting negatively and positively to other people, and Claire is seen reacting negatively and positively to Justine. The reason to me why Claire becomes such a big focus in the second half of the movie is because she begins to understand Justine due to the circumstances regarding the planet Melancholia. She experiences a large amount of anxiety and fear that greatly impact her and consume much of what she thinks about. She understands a lot more about how Justine feels, which might be part of why she becomes more sympathetic. However, a family member shouldn't have to go through a traumatic event to be able to talk with and care for someone that is experiencing depression. This does not discredit, though, the effort that Claire makes to help Justine, and that is still very valid. But is it important for a family member to be caring and supportive at all times, which is, I think, what Von Trier is trying to communicate with showing the relationship between these two sisters. In Nymphomaniac, the counterpart is essentially a complete stranger. We delved even further. We went from a husband and a wife to a set of siblings to completely different people. Joe and Seligman have no relation or knowledge of each other before meeting, yet Joe reveals her life story to him. In contrast to what Antichrist and Melancholia show, the character of Seligman represents an outsider's perspective and an outside reaction to depression. It can be also seen as representing the way that a friend or society as a whole might react. Seligman also presents to me the most interesting reaction in the entire trilogy. As mentioned previously, Seligman is directly connected to the psychologist Dr. Martin Seligman. The character in the film is almost the embodiment of the thoughts and ideas expressed by Dr. Seligman's positive psychology idea. Seligman in the film is seen as a near polar opposite to that of Joe. Whereas he and she have many things in common, being husband and wife, and Claire and Justine have a lot in common, being sisters, there's almost nothing that is similar between the two main characters of Nymphomaniac. The film extensively talks about the distances and differences. One of the ones that they bring up and make important is the fact that Seligman is asexual, which is quite literally the polar opposite of Joe, who is a nymphomaniac. They are fundamentally different people, and yet they get along for the majority of the film. Despite their vastly different opinions, their conversations never become hostile, but instead are composed of well-articulated discussion. In only a few instances does either character express frustration or disgust in something that the other says. Despite being complete strangers with different views, their interactions are the calmest of the three duos that exist in the trilogy. This is because of the nature of Seligman as a character. He represents the most optimistic and positive approach to the situation that Joe is describing. He praises her often instead of tearing her down as most people would. He truly tries to help her change her opinion of herself, and ultimately, he is successful. By the end of the film, Joe admits that her discussions with Seligman greatly helped her in feeling at peace. Other than Seligman's final reaction, which is vile, he is a sympathetic character who is trying to help someone become a better person. Before Von Trier ends the film in a very nihilistic manner, he is trying to communicate the understanding and care that it takes to help someone who's going through depression, specifically with someone who sees themselves in such a negative light. Von Trier wants people with depression to be helped and to be helped, and that we need to have sympathy and feel sympathy for people who are going through that. But he shows with the end of the film that he believes that people don't actually care as much as they say they do. I think this could connect to some distrust of psychologists that Von Trier might have, or it could be the very opposite. Either way, his presentation of the character Seligman is fascinating and portrays a very unique approach to talking about depression in film. The way in which Von Trier not only portrays the central character, but also their counterpart, is masterfully done and helps to illustrate a wide range of alternate perspectives. It shows multiple points of view that either know the protagonists or getting to know them better, and it is a display of both viewpoints in order to communicate the message of the films. It helps distinguish these films and gives them a lot of their emotional impact. These relationships are key, and just as they are key when anyone's going through depression, their relationships are such a big part of how someone is able to get through something and through their tough times. And how others respond, especially those close to you, is really important. And that's why I think it's such an important thing to talk about when discussing these films. The next episode will be more about the society and more about the general, more broad reactions, but it will kind of be a pseudo continuation of this one. So until the next episode, thank you so much. And I'm excited for the next one.